I'm King Lincoln. It's the first week of the month, so it must be time for the Humble Choice June 2021 review. I only play each game for 1 hour to try to get a sampling of them so I can tell you who's going to enjoy each title and who may want to skip them. It's a major month with another massive headliner, so we're going to dive right in. And our first game is one whose base game was already in Humble Monthly in February 2019. I wonder if they thought we'd forget that. Well, clearly I didn't. Sid Meier's Civilization 6, the Platinum Edition. This is Civilization, and you probably already know if you like this franchise or not. If you don't already have a strong opinion on it, I'd actually probably recommend you try this game out because it's a deep, engaging 4X game where you run a country or, of course, a civilization. It's probably the most accessible franchise in the 4X genre as well. There are multiple ways to play Civilization, whether you're chasing technology, culture, military might, religion. I think now you can even do diplomacy. The entire game is played out over multiple hours and likely days as you run your country and try to be the dominant force in one or probably most of these areas. The choice is really up to the player, and it's a deep, engaging experience. The Platinum Edition here actually has both major DLCs for the game, Rise and Fall and Gathering Storm. They're huge changes, but more importantly, they're big improvements for the titles, fixing issues that people had with the base game itself. Though, this actually doesn't come with the new Frontier Pass, which is a shame, but it is a new expansion. So this is Civilization 6 at its best, and honestly, now that both expansions are out, it does feel like a very fresh entry into the franchise. So pick this one up if you want a Civilization game, you're curious about the franchise, you just need the DLC, or you liked Endless Space 2 from a couple months ago. However, be prepared. It is one of the easiest 4X games to get into, but it still will take players at least like 10 to 20 hours to really get a handle on all the major systems here. Secret Neighbor. Hello Neighbor was in August 2020's Humble Choice. If you picked that game up and thought, well, this needs to be in multiplayer, then this is the game for you. It takes the same Hello Neighbor formula of hunting for keys, but randomizes the map and has one of 6 players become a secret neighbor. There are ways that this might have worked, especially if it played out like Mafia or Among Us, but in this case players just have to avoid being caught by the neighbor, and when the neighbor is finally revealed, the game actually just becomes more of a brawl than anything strategic. There's limited communication, which harms the game, and much of the strategy is just having the neighbor isolate and pick off the party, which means kids will have to clump into more groups. But Secret Neighbor has the same issue as Hello Neighbor, as it's lacking a tutorial, and I still really don't know what the game expected me to do, or if I could have any fun with it. Now maybe you need a group of people with voice chat that you already knew, but, this isn't for me. Pick this up if you enjoyed Hello Neighbor but want a randomized multiplayer version of it, or have a group of friends who want to play this game. There is an established fan base with more than 100 people playing it each day, even before it was in the Humble Choice, but I still really don't enjoy this franchise myself, and I don't know if this game will change many people's opinions on the franchise. Stubbs the Zombie in Rebel Without a Pulse. This is a throwback, a 2005 game from the original Xbox era, and this is one of the most outlandish games out there. I actually can't think of many games where you play as a zombie, and a game where the main character is a zombie for the entire runtime is extremely rare. But Stubbs the Zombie, yes of course I'm abbreviating it, is interesting. You're able to attack humans and eat their brains and grow an undead horde. What's actually strange is that 15 years later, this gameplay still works, though of course the game is showing that it came from a different era. It's very entertaining. The story and cutscenes are the biggest issue with the game. The cutscenes are a little bit too short and a bit random, like the game just throws Stubbs in a level because that level was made, such as a hospital. Yet, if you can accept a few flaws like that, it is an interesting throwback because it feels fresh due to the concept not being something that has been remade like a million times, like a military shooter. Pick this up if you buy the bundle for something else. That is an odd thing to say, I admit, but I'm torn on Stubbs. This isn't the reason to buy the Humble Choice, but at the same time, if you get this game in the choice, absolutely check it out because it's a classic Xbox title and a very different type of game you probably won't see again, sadly. Worms Rumble. Team 17 has a decent number of Worms games, and they all tend to have single-player components with solid multiplayer. Worms Rumble skips that single-player campaign and focuses solely on a brand new real-time multiplayer mode where players can use classic worm weapons to kill each other. I wasn't expecting to have a great time as the player counts are a little bit low on Steam charts with less than 40 players online since the bundle's launch. However, there does appear to be crossplay and Worms Rumbles appears to be active right now, though I wasn't matched up with many Steam players. I still found myself having a great time and wanting to play more. The one question I have is one of the player base, but if that player base can remain constant, I think Worms Rumble is a solid and enjoyable experience. The combat is fast and strategic, the character designs are those lovable worms from previous games, and the audio was still hilarious to hear. There is only 3 maps, but I had an enjoyable enough time and I'd actually like to come back and play more. Pick this up if you're a huge Worms fan and you want to take a risk on the player base. I enjoyed my time with the game, but even playing it with some friends on the Twitch stream, shout out to Biohazard Battle and Royale that you're seeing on screen, I don't know if I see the player base remaining steady on Steam. It does appear to have some life on console, so crossplay will hopefully help. Going Under. This is a dungeon crawler / roguelite with a corporate environment theme. You play as a young intern who's hired to work in the marketing department but ends up going into the basement to slay monsters in your Amazon-inspired office. Going Under had me laughing quite a bit. Perhaps that's because I spent too much time in corporate America, or I recognize what most of these scenes and characters are supposed to be. I don't know if it's going to translate to everyone's enjoyment, but I still got a lot of chuckles out of this game. And the gameplay is as good as the writing. This is a typical roguelite, but it focuses on a Breath of Wild style durability system. In this case of a roguelite where you're constantly moving between rooms and locations, I think that's a great addition. It keeps the players from favoring a specific item. Each dungeon also has a different selection of tools and items to pick up and use, so there's no one strategy that's going to win the game. Pick this up if you like roguelites, clever writing, or like this art style. There's something really funny about knocking an enemy out of a car to drive it around yourself and smash up an office, or fighting goons who are using moving dollies to smack you around. Maybe it's just me, but I couldn't get enough of this game. Panzer Paladin. A classic 8-bit or 16-bit style game with a completely modern sensibility and excellent gameplay. Players will pilot their mecha, collecting fragile weapons and fighting their way through multiple levels in a great throwback to an ancient era. The gameplay is pretty unique as well. Players will have to constantly seek out new weapons as there's a durability system in the game that causes their weapons to break. There's quite a few styles of weapons and interesting designs, but there's also workshop support so players can include additional weapons from a library of 2,000 already on Steam, or create their own and share them. Though, sadly, those only appear in certain locations, I believe. The art is great, the music is amazing, and the 8 or 16-bit era graphics look fantastic. There's also multiple difficulties, a remix mode for extra challenge, speedruns, special challenge maps, and even more. Pick this up if you like solid 2D platforming with sword-based combat. There's something very satisfying about this game and makes me want to see more of it. Still, this is a old-style retro game, even with that little bit of modernization, so if you want something that's going to feel like it could only come out this generation, well, Panzer Paladin is not that. Milky Way Prince, the Vampire Star. This game is probably not aimed at me. I like visual novels, and that's what Milky Way Prince is, but it is also a homosexual relationship, not that there's anything wrong with that. But the main character didn't speak to me, and after my hour, I wasn't really invested in the relationship. Is it a personal issue that I couldn't connect to the characters, or the game's issue for not really making me care about the characters? I've played gay characters before in games, even in romantic visual novels, but I couldn't meet the game on its level in the first hour, and sometimes it feels like the game was trying to go to outlandish places, almost to get people to make jokes about it. Reading about the themes of the game online does seem to have an interesting story or thought at the center of this, but it didn't appear in that first hour, and with only a couple hours of gameplay, I'm really not sure it's going to be for me. Pick this up if you like what you're seeing on screen or you're really into boy on boy visual novels. I'm sure there is a fan base for this game, I'm just not a member of that group. I'm actually not sure how big that group is, but there definitely is one. Desolate. A multiplayer survival horror game with a really strange implementation of multiplayer. The single-player prologue section of this game worked hard as it tried, but kind of failed to tell a story to hook players. It almost feels like it was an afterthought. From there, players are put into a multiplayer map and told to go complete quests from completely random characters. The first quest is to re-establish communication, for instance. My issue with the game is that it feels like it's a forced stealth game. Enemies are too powerful, there's not enough health items, there's a lot of enemies in your way, so players are either going to have to constantly creep around to avoid being seen, that's slow, or constantly run from enemies, that's annoying. The combat and gameplay just don't feel that great either, and they're even trying to do a new form of combat in a beta. Some elements are just trying to be like Stalker, but done far better in that 13-year-old title. The multiplayer is especially egregious, though. Players will start hundreds of meters apart, and while working together makes that frustrating combat slightly bearable, any loss of life separates the party again by a huge gap over and over. Pick this up if you must have a survival horror game to play with friends, but there's so many better games, even if we only consider multiplayer survival horror. I'm not even a fan of the genre, but even so, this one's at the bottom of my list still, actually even below Resident Evil 6. Ikenfell. The humble extra sneak peek from June 2020 is now a humble choice, and it's great to see the final game. This is a lot of different pieces that come together to make one interesting game. It's an RPG where players learn magic and go to witch school, the combat has timed attacks and blocks similar to Super Mario RPGs, and there is a strategy RPG grid of moving characters around in battle. And honestly, none of that is a bad thing. The story starts with the main character hunting for her sister, who stayed at a school for the summer, but it appears something has gone wrong and the school is now locked down. The game revolves around fighting enemies to get more powerful and solving rather simple puzzles. There appears to be an interesting challenge here, especially if you're a hoarder like me. The art is simple, but the designs are interesting, and there's actually quite a few characters I wanted to know more about or see what would happen next in the story. Also, the HP restore system and the save system are activated by petting cats. I love that. Pick this up if you want an RPG focused on magical systems and timed actions. It's also said to be about 20 hours long, so it's a good runtime, and it looks like it has an interesting tale to tell. Paw Paw Paw. This game starts with a funny premise. The king is hit by a meteor and decides all animals should wear pants. The resistance, known as anti-pants, one word, fights against him and tries to stop the evil king. Funny concept, which quickly becomes a typical beat-em-up as that's pretty much forgotten. The art in the game is also a little bit strange. While the animals look pained when you're beating them up, I almost feel like they didn't go far enough because I'm not sure if I should feel bad for them or if it's supposed to be humorous. These are also the enemies I fought for almost the entire time I played the game. I fought a couple variants of them and 2 big bosses, but the generic characters are almost always these guys. The gameplay is just hit attack over and over until you kill enemies. There are upgrade systems, gear systems, usable items, but most of the time you're just spamming an attack and thinking about what else you could be doing. Beat 'em ups need a little something more than just simple gameplay systems, and I'm not seeing Paw Paw have anything more than that. Pick this up if you want every beat 'em up ever, but I'd actually grab Castle Crashers, Scott Pilgrim, Capcom Beat 'em Up Collection, Streets of Rage, and honestly, so many other beat 'em ups. I wanted to like this, but it's kind of just weak. The music is earworm levels of repetitiveness, and I don't really talk about music often, so by me bringing it up should tell you something. Effie. Effie is a weird game with pacing issues. The first 20 minutes is a rather boring 3D platforming game, then the player gets a shield and uses that to beat enemies for another 20 minutes, and then there's a large open world segment with a out of firm direction given to where the player should go. I feel like Effie didn't really focus on one style of game, and the problem is Effie struggles to be interesting in anything but those open world segments, and even there, that's a short part of the adventure. There's a ton of rune stones that feel like a collectathon, but those go to a leveling system that didn't feel necessary. And there's nothing really wrong with Effie, it's just average, even with all these systems and styles. The puzzles are a bit too easy, the combat is simple, and even when the game is good, it's merely just good. It doesn't really have its own identity, even the narrator feels like an okay version of Bastions. Pick this up if you want an average game. Effie isn't bad, but it's also not good enough to recommend, and that's gonna be its issue. I could imagine someone just playing through the entire game because there's nothing that really harms the experience to make you stop, but I also see people like putting it down for dinner or bed, and then when they come back they'll just move on to something else because there's not a reason to return here. Disjunction. This is a story-based stealth game that seems to take its story very seriously. There are 3 playable characters, with the first one being a PI, and every character has their own abilities and upgrades. The gameplay keeps reminding me of Metal Gear Solid, where players had to avoid view cones of enemy guards, yet there is a higher push for abilities and skills in this game to avoid alerting the enemies to your location and of course getting slaughtered by that. The story ties in well with the game, with each level being set up with players trying to get information from that location. Players can play non-lethally, lethally, or of course a mixture of two, and the developers promise a story that will change depending on your actions. That is a common promise, but it looks like the game might pull it off. After the first level, the quest giver chastised me for killing a few guards, and oh boy, she's not going to like how I responded in the second level. Pick this up if you like action stealth. Players have a lot of tricks and agency in the game, and this is intended as a game where players take out enemies rather than just sneaking by, but this is a stealth game, so it's all about that slow, methodical approach. Those are the 12 choices we have for this month, but we also of course have the Humble Original bundled in as a bonus game, and this month it's Fistful of Nothing. I'm kind of not comfortable with Fistful of Nothing. I do think trigger warnings can be a bit silly, but this is a game about an office worker and then people trying to shoot him in the office. It's told and done poorly, so maybe there is a story reason for it, or maybe it's just poorly timed. Now, the creator of the game is Somalian, so I don't really think this is done for shock value, but it's still kind of strange. Much of the game is running around, avoiding being detected in view cones, and eventually using an unlocked pistol to hold up enemies. It could be a good concept, but the more I played with it, the more I found myself struggling with the controls or gameplay. I'm not even sure what I was expected to do in the last level. I tried and I kind of got stuck. Enemies just felt way too aggressive at times. There's also some poor controls where players can be stuck on walls and they should slip past them. That might be a mechanic where players are expected to rotate and move past, but I'm really not sold on that if it was intentional. Pick this up if you like what you're seeing. It's the Humble Original, so it's a free add-on, but this felt like the roughest Humble Original I've yet to see, and that's actually a bad sign. That's what I have for the 13 games, but I do have some thoughts on the bundle. Now, at first, I thought this was going to be by the headliner or nothing, but after playing all the games here, I actually think there's a good amount of choice. Not a great one, of course. Civilization 6 is the anchor to the lineup, but there are quite a few other titles that are worthy of praise, and you could get your value from those titles. I think I got my money's worth, even if I didn't want the Civ DLC, but that is what I bought it for. On the other hand, there are some really weird choices here. 3 multiplayer-focused games was quite a bit. The original is, once again, similar to another game in the bundle, both being stealth-based. There are 2 games with weapon durability systems. Maybe it's me just noticing patterns and coincidences where there is none, but those are kind of odd. And then there's the elephant in the room, or rather the bundle. The GOG key for Disjunction. Apparently the studio couldn't get keys from Steam for some reason, and I'll trust them on that. I don't think this is some conspiracy. GOG is giving away DRM-free games, so it's actually probably worse for their future sales, but I also kind of hate having a GOG game when I have my entire library on Steam. I don't think it really hurts the game itself, but then again, GOG achievements just don't excite me in the same way. That's a dumb point, I know, but it's true for me. So let's get to it. It's my favorite part of the Humble Choice reviews, ranking games. We have the 5 strongest and 3 weakest of the month. And we'll start with the 3rd weakest of the month, Paw Paw Paw. This is a bland game, but it's actually the music that made me give it a place on this list. There are a few others in the running, but Paw 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 had nothing I could recommend except for that smart concept of that opening cutscene that just doesn't appear in the rest of the game. The 2nd weakest of the month, Desolate. There's maybe a small audience for this one, but for me, I just didn't like it, and even playing it in multiplayer was frustrating. Just teaming up and taking on enemies should have been easy, but having to meet up to do that after every death became a chore, and there's so many better survival horror games. And the weakest of the month, Secret Neighbor. It's a multiplayer-only version of Hello Neighbor, and there is an audience for that, but there's no reason for this to be in the bundle, as the people it appeals to are the ones who already liked the last game that has been bundled before. The fact that this game probably needs active voice chat to be truly fun, and I only saw 2 people using mics as well as an all-or-nothing party system, is what really kills it. And before anyone asks, Worms Rumble does have consistent games, had fun gameplay, and a good atmosphere. Yes, servers may tank tomorrow, of course, but that is true of all multiplayer games. If you actually had 8 friends together, I'd probably recommend Rumble out of all 3 of the multiplayer games. So let's talk about the other side of this list, the strongest of the month, and we'll be starting with the 5th strongest game of this month is Disjunction. Yes, it is a GOG key, but it's also a very good stealth game that had me interested and should be decently replayable. There's an interesting start to a larger story and 3 different storylines that I imagine will dovetail. I'm personally going to be adding it to my Steam wishlist. Yeah, I know that's kind of stupid and part of the problem with this. The 4th strongest this month, Panzer Paladin. Good classic gameplay, excellent controls, interesting level design, and excellent graphics. This is a great game, and it's one I wish I knew of earlier. Glad to finally have a copy. The 3rd strongest this month, Ikenfell. I liked the demo of this game in June 2020. Now that I got to see the start of the story, I really want to play more. Solid strategy RPG gameplay with a good action timing battle system. I'm in. The 2nd strongest of this month is Civilization 6, the Platinum Edition. What? Yeah, okay. It's the best value proposition, it's the longest game, it's the AAA game in the pack, it's the best version of Civ 6. I understand all of that. But it's also a game that was in a previous bundle. It takes a very long time to get into, longer still to play an entire game. It's not for everyone. Civilization 6 is a great game though, and if you want it to be number 1, you can pretend it is. I have no problem pretending that too, but I think there was one better game. Which is the strongest of this month? Going Under. Like I said, if you want Civ to be the top dog, pretend I said that, but Going Under is the game I still want to be playing. It's the game that I wasn't expecting and the game I want to see more of. I don't typically laugh at games. I cracked up at this one. I'm kind of hot and cold on roguelites. I'm very hot on this one. I'm not sure if this is a game just purely aimed at me, a guy who's been on agile teams, done stand-ups, dealt with corporate BS, but I think this is the stronger game. And if you want, grab your pitchforks over there, $5 a pop, and just come at me. Anyways, now that I've lost all credibility for not putting that AAA headliner at the top of the list, it's time for me to go. If you have enjoyed this video though, please consider subscribing, ring that bell if you care, feel free to voice your praise or displeasure down in the comments about anything I've said, and throw a like in the pile down below if you are feeling it. You can always throw a dislike if you want as well. A quick channel update. I haven't released a video outside of the Humble Bundle review in May, and that's intentional. I'm actually trying something new here. It's my biggest video yet. The video will be all about the Yakuza series, the first 3 games of which have been in the Humble Monthly and the Humble Choice, so it is relevant to this video. It's going to be everything from which game to start with, reviews of each game, and finally a discussion of the major pieces of the series. There's really something for everyone. What I'm trying to do is I'm going to try to release that 2 weeks after the Humble Choice video to be a little more consistent, so check back then. Like always, I want to send a thank you out to everyone who has supported the channel so far through subscribing, watching, sharing the videos, and just being here. Guys, it really means a lot to me. I'm going to be popping up my review of Civilization 6 from my channel as well. That review is only the base game and a bit old for my format, but if you want to see that, check it out. And until then, I'm King Link, and thanks for watching.